I will always remember the smell of disinfectant in the hospital hallway that day. Not because it was strong, but because it brought me back to reality. The moment Chris fell to his knees in front of me, that cold, clinical smell acted like a scalpel, precisely cutting away the illusion I had maintained for 6 years. Audrey, I'm begging you. Chris's knees hit the linoleum floor with a dull thud. He was wearing the dark charcoal gray wool coat I had bought for his birthday the year before. The collar was slightly wrinkled. His eyes were bloodshot, and there was a tremor in his voice I had never heard before. I looked down at him, my fingers gripping the informed consent form so tightly, my nails were unconsciously digging into my palms. She's dying. No, she is dying. He looked up, tears rolling down his cheeks. The doctors say if she doesn't get a transplant today, Madison won't make it to the end of the week. You're the only match, Audrey. You're the only one who can save her. Madison, his college sweetheart. The woman who, barely a month before our wedding, had suddenly been diagnosed with a hereditary liver disease. I should have been furious. I should have thrown that consent form in his face and walked away. But I didn't. I just stood there listening to the rhythmic sound of my own breathing, steady as a pendulum. Chris, do you understand what you're asking me? My voice sounded so flat I barely recognized it. You're asking your wife to have a piece of her liver cut out to save your ex-girlfriend. She'll die. Suddenly, he grabbed my wrist so hard, my bones protested. I know it's not fair to you, but she is really going to die. I owe her, Audrey. I owe her my life. I owe her my life. I repeated that phrase quietly, as if I were chewing on a fruit covered in thorns. And what do you owe me? He froze. Down the hall, the sound of a nurse's cart echoed the squeak of the wheels bouncing off the empty walls. I looked into his eyes, the same eyes that once seemed so full of a deep, profound love. In that moment, all I saw in them was an absolute sense of entitlement. He took it for granted that I would agree, just like I had for the last 6 years. He took it for granted that I would give up making partner at my downtown law firm to become the unpaid in-house legal counsel for his tech startup. He took it for granted that I would review contracts at 3 a.m. and serve coffee to his parents with a smile the next day. He genuinely believed that everything of mine, my time, my career, my body, were resources at his personal disposal. Get up first, I said. You'll do it. His eyes lit up instantly. I said get up first. He got up from the floor, brushing the dust off his knees. I noticed his phone screen light up in his hand. Pinned to the top of his iMessage app was the name Maddie. The last text read, "She agreed," sent 3 minutes ago. I looked away from his phone and back down at the informed consent form. It covered the pre-operative evaluation, the surgical risks, and had a blank space for the donor's signature and thumbprint. Everything had been prepared to perfection. They were just waiting for the stroke of my pen. Who prepared this informed consent? I asked. Are you familiar with hospital protocols? I'm asking you who told the hospital to draft this. Chris's eyes darted to the side. That look was entirely too familiar. After working as a litigator for 6 years, I had seen that exact same expression on the faces of countless witnesses on the stand. It meant he was carefully choosing his words. I talked it over with her attending physician. You know, finding a match is incredibly rare. All your indicators, my indicators. I cut him off. Last month, when I had my annual physical at the clinic, the chief medical officer told me my ALT enzyme levels were elevated and recommended a follow-up. Chris, a person with elevated ALT is not a suitable donor for a liver transplant. Silence hung suspended in the air. 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, I watched Chris's expression transition from panic to composure, and then from composure to a coldness I had never seen in him before. "That was your previous checkup. The follow-up results came back completely normal," he said. "And who did the follow-up?" "Dr. Evans, from this hospital." Dr. Evans. I nodded. The same doctor Chris had treated to rounds of bourbon on 3 separate occasions. The same one he had helped quietly settle a medical malpractice suit last year. Chris's lips tightened, but he stayed silent. I felt a chill, and it had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. It was the kind of freezing cold that seeps straight into your bones. I had been married for 6 years, thinking I had married a somewhat indecisive but fundamentally good man. Only then did I understand that a good man doesn't seek out a corrupt doctor to forge a clean bill of health when his wife's health is actually in question. "You forged my medical results," I said. It wasn't a question. "Audrey, listen to me. You forged my medical results." I repeated it. My voice remained surprisingly calm. "To bypass surgical protocols, you falsified your wife's medical data. Chris, do you have any idea that if something goes wrong on that operating table because of my pre-existing health issues, they won't just charge you with healthcare fraud. They'll charge you with manslaughter." He paled, but only for an instant. The very next second, he slipped right back into that familiar expression, offended, helpless, cornered. He had no other choice. His voice dropped. "You wouldn't understand what's between her and me." "I don't need to understand it." I folded the informed consent form and put it in my purse. "What are you doing?" He panicked. "I'm taking it home to read," I replied. "After all, it's a legal document regarding my body. I need to review it carefully. Give me 2 days." 2 days? She might not last 2 days. Then find another donor. As I turned around, I heard Chris's strained voice behind me. "Audrey, when did you become so cold?" I didn't look back because I didn't want him to see me smile. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the bitter, toxic smile of someone who was finally seeing the absolute cold truth. For 6 years, I sacrificed my career, wrecked my health, and drained my savings to keep his startup afloat. And now, when he demands they cut me open to give him my organs, I refuse. And he calls that coldness? The moment I walked through the hospital doors, the biting Seattle wind hit my neck. I stood on the concrete steps, took a deep breath, opened the Notes app on my phone, and typed 3 lines. 1 review. All patent transfer records under Chris's name. 2. Investigate financial ties between Dr. Evans and Chris. 3. Request the raw data from my original physical. 3 tasks, 3 threads, 3 nails in the coffin. My thumbs tapped the screen, letter by letter, with absolute certainty. The Audrey who had been invisible in her marriage for 6 years died in that exact moment. I didn't go straight home. I drove to a 24-hour diner up on Capitol Hill. It was a place I used to frequent during my endless late-night shifts at the firm. The Wi-Fi was strong in the back booth, and nobody knew me there. I ordered a black coffee and opened my laptop. As the nominal general counsel for Chris's company Apex Tech, I had full administrative access to the internal corporate network. I was the one who built their legal and administrative architecture when the company was incorporated. Chris never cared about those technical details. He didn't know that those exact same details were about to become his fatal vulnerability. First, I pulled up the company's patent registry for the last 6 months. 5 minutes later, my hand froze over the trackpad. The screen clearly showed that the company's 3 core patents related to AI technology for medical imaging had been transferred via a licensing agreement 2 months earlier. The receiving entity was listed as Madison Biotech LLC. Madison Biotech. Madison. I ran a search on the state LLC registry. CEO Gregory Clark Madison's father. Registered capital $500,000. Paid in capital 0. The registered address was a perfect match for Madison's apartment. I leaned back against the vinyl booth and closed my eyes for a second. Those 3 patents were Apex Tech's most valuable assets. They were the result of my own blood and sweat. I had personally drafted the intellectual property protection strategy and spent 8 months dealing with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office to secure them. Their conservative valuation was at least $4 million, and Chris had just handed them over to Madison's family as compensation. I picked up the mug and took a sip. The bitterness of the black coffee was perfect. Then, I picked up my phone and sent a text. "Lauren, can you talk?" My phone rang 10 seconds later. In the middle of the night? Who died? Lauren's voice sounded thick with sleep. She was my old college roommate, who now ran one of the best forensic labs in the city. "I need you to do something for me," I said. "Last month, I had my annual physical at the clinic. I'll send you the report number. I need you to pull the raw lab data from that file. You suspect the report was tampered with?" "I don't suspect it. I know it for a fact. But I need the raw data as hard proof." Lauren stayed quiet for a few seconds. "You know pulling raw data requires triggering a forensic audit protocol. I need a formal legal request." "I'll issue you a formal legal request. I am both the client and the victim. If my medical data was forged to pass the legal and medical clearances for an organ transplant, Do you understand the nature of this case better than I do?" 5 seconds of absolute silence on the other end of the line. "Are you serious?" Lauren's tone completely shifted. "Give me 3 days. You'll have all the documents." "Good. I'll file the request in the morning." Audrey paused. "Be careful." After hanging up, I kept digging through the corporate system. At 1:47 in the morning, I found an encrypted folder on Chris's personal cloud. The folder was named simply M. I guessed the password on the 3rd try. Madison's birthday. That man's imagination when it came to cybersecurity was completely eclipsed by his imagination for betrayal. There were 3 things in the folder. First, screenshots of his WhatsApp conversation with Dr. Evans. The content was blunt. Chris was asking Dr. Evans to help adjust the donor's preoperative evaluation data. Dr. Evans replied, "No problem. I'll handle it with the clinic." Second, the patent transfer memo signed by Chris. The date was exactly 1 month before it was registered with the state. The final paragraph of the memo read, "The gratuitous transfer of the 3 aforementioned patents serves as personal compensation from me to Madison Clark and her family. This decision has nothing to do with Audrey Foster." Has nothing to do with Audrey Foster. I stared at those words for a very long time. Half the seed money to develop those patents came from the sale of my premarital condo. I wrote the IP strategy. I filed the applications. I even edited the technical claims for him word by word while lying in bed recovering from a miscarriage. Has nothing to do with Audrey Foster. The 3rd item made my heart stop for a fraction of a second. It was an ultrasound. The image showed the tiny curved silhouette of a fetus. On the back of the photo, someone had handwritten, "Chris, this is our baby." Madison's handwriting. The date was stamped a year ago. When I set the coffee mug down on the table, my fingers finally started to tremble. Not from anger, not from heartbreak, but from an overwhelming, crushing sense of absurdity. My husband was asking me to cut out a piece of my liver to save the woman who had carried his child, and was calling it owing her his life. I closed the laptop and looked out the diner's large plate glass window. The city lights flickered like cold sparks under the Seattle drizzle. My reflection in the glass was blurry, but my eyes were clear. So clear it scared me. I opened the Notes app again and added a fourth line beneath the previous three. 4. Madison's baby. Run a paternity test. Not to confirm that Chris was the father. Honestly, at this point, that barely mattered to me emotionally. But because I'm a lawyer, and a lawyer's instinct is to verify every single fact before drawing a conclusion, especially the facts that seem like absolute truths. At 1:45 in the morning, I paid the bill and walked out of the diner. The night wind was fierce, whipping my hair around. As I stood on the sidewalk waiting for my Uber, my phone screen lit up. A text from Chris. "Have you thought about it? The surgery is scheduled for 10 a.m. tomorrow. Come straight to the hospital." He didn't ask where I was. He didn't ask if I had eaten. He didn't ask if I was okay. Just an order. I stared at the text, deleted the furious reply I had typed out by instinct, and rewrote it. "Okay, I'll be there." I slipped the phone into my pocket and smiled slightly. Of course I would be there. Only what I'd be bringing to the hospital wouldn't be a signed consent form, but a reckoning he couldn't even fathom in his worst nightmares. The next morning at 8 a.m., I arrived at the hospital exactly on time. Chris was waiting for me at the end of the surgical ward hallway, holding 2 coffees. His face wore a meticulously manufactured expression of tenderness and guilt. "Did you sleep well?" He handed me a cup. "Have something warm." I took it and took a sip. "I'm fine. What time is the surgery?" "At 10 a.m. First, you need a final preoperative consultation. Come with me." He reached out to take my hand, but I pulled away, completely naturally, using that hand to hold the coffee. He either didn't notice or chose to ignore it. On the way to the consultation room, we passed the ICU windows. Chris's steps slowed involuntarily. His eyes locked onto the bed inside. Madison was lying there. Her skin had a yellowish pallor. She had lost a lot of weight. Tubes connected her to beeping monitors. "She's on artificial liver support right now," Chris whispered. "The doctors say she can hold on maybe 5 days tops." I looked at her face, and to my surprise, I felt no hate. Hating a terminally ill person is too easy. So easy, it's cheap. My opponent had never been her. It was the man standing right next to me. The man who saw me as collateral damage. "Let's go," I said. The preoperative consultation was on the 3rd floor. It was run by the infamous Dr. Evans. He was in his 50s, slightly overweight, wearing gold-rimmed glasses. Seeing me, he flashed an exceptionally warm smile. "Audrey, you made it. Please have a seat." Dr. Evans stood up to pour me a glass of water. "Chris told me yesterday that you agreed to the surgery. It's a truly heroic act." "Nothing heroic," I said, sitting down. "Just a sense of duty." "You have a wonderful perspective, Audrey." Dr. Evans sat back down and opened a file. "Let's briefly go over the protocol. This is your preoperative evaluation report. All indicators are within safe ranges. You fully meet the standards to be a donor." "Dr. Evans," I interrupted him, "I have a question. What is my ALT level?" Dr. Evans's smile froze for half a second. If I weren't a litigator, if I hadn't cross-examined hundreds of witnesses, I might have missed that half second. 42. He looked down at the report and spoke a little faster. "Absolutely normal. The upper limit of the reference range is 40. Your slight elevation is a standard fluctuation. It won't affect the surgery." 42. I repeated it. But I recall that during my physical last month it was 87. It dropped from 87 to 42 in a month, a decrease of more than 50%. Dr. Evans, as a hepatology specialist, Do you consider that to be in line with normal physiological laws? Dr. Evans closed the folder. He looked at Chris. Chris looked at me. I set the coffee down on the desk and pulled my phone out of my purse. You're nervous, Dr. Evans. I didn't come here to make a scene. My tone was as cordial as casual chatter at a cocktail party. I just wanted to give you a heads up. Last night, I formally instructed a forensic lab to legally subpoena the raw lab data from the clinic. We should have the results in about 3 days. Dr. Evans's face lost its color. Chris stepped forward. Audrey, let me explain. I raised a hand to stop him, keeping my eyes fixed on Dr. Evans. Raw data is generated directly by the lab equipment. It cannot be forged or deleted. If the raw data doesn't match the report you just handed me, Dr. Evans, I believe you understand the consequences better than I do. Falsifying a donor's medical records to facilitate an organ transplant. Where does that fall under federal healthcare fraud laws? And the National Organ Transplant Act, I don't need to give you a law lecture, do I? A thin sheen of sweat appeared on Dr. Evans's forehead. He opened his mouth and his eyes darted back toward Chris. This time, it wasn't a look asking for help. It was a look of pure resentment. You told me she wouldn't check. I mentally translated that look for him. Dr. Evans swallowed hard. Perhaps there was a minor clerical error during data entry. I will have them review everything immediately. That won't be necessary. I stood up and picked up the preoperative evaluation report from the desk. I'll be taking this report as evidence. You can't take that. It's hospital property. It's my personal medical document. I have every right to informed consent and to possess my own records under HIPAA. Is Dr. Evans attempting to prevent a patient from accessing her own medical file? Dr. Evans fell completely silent. I carefully folded the report, slipped it into my purse, and zipped it shut. Every movement was fluid, without a single wasted gesture. Chris stood by the door, his face ashen. His voice sounded muffled, as if he were squeezing the words through his teeth. What the hell are you trying to do? I want you to walk with me. I walked past him. Let's talk in private. He followed me. We walked down the hall and took the stairs up to the hospital roof. The biting winter wind immediately whipped at the edge of his coat. What did you find out? He cut straight to the chase. What do you think, Chris? Let's not beat around the bush. I turned to face him. The Seattle skyline stretched out behind him. I saw the patent transfers. His pupils contracted. Those 3 patents are the company's core assets. Without a board resolution, without my consent as a shareholder, you transferred them for free to a Shell LLC registered under Madison's father's name. Chris, what is that called in the corporate world? It's called embezzlement and a breach of fiduciary duty. Half the funds to develop those patents were my premarital assets. I wrote the IP strategy. When you handed them over, did it cross your mind, even for a second, that my blood was in them? The wind howled between us. Chris's lips trembled, and then he had exactly the reaction I expected. Audrey, I am so sorry. His tears welled up all at once, without warning. But Madison is really dying. Her liver could fail at any second. Her family begged me. I couldn't just stand by and watch her die. I transferred those patents to her father because her family went completely bankrupt paying her medical bills. So you used my assets to plug their holes. I'll get it all back when she recovers. I swear, when she gets better. I stared at him. And how exactly do you plan to arrange everything when she gets better? Are you going to keep me around, playing the role of the loyal, ignorant wife? Or do you expect me to generously accept that you and your child with her will just stroll into our lives? His tears stopped dead. In a second, the air froze. I saw pure panic in the depths of his eyes. It wasn't the panic of someone caught making a mistake. It was the terror of, how does she even know that? What child? He stammered. I didn't even bother to answer. I'm not signing the consent form, I said. Find another option for the surgery. I am not participating. You can't do this, he grabbed my arm. Madison will die. Her life or death is not my responsibility. I yanked my arm free. But the consequences of you forging my physical tampering with medical data and siphoning company assets, those are your responsibility. You're going to report me to the police. His voice suddenly turned ice cold, as if a completely different person were standing in front of me. I looked into his eyes. The warmth had vanished entirely, revealing the absolute truth hiding underneath. Calculation. He was calculating what price he would have to pay if I went to the authorities, and how to minimize his losses. That expression was Chris's true face. I didn't say I was going to report you. I took a step back. I just said I need time to think. Give me 3 days. In 3 days, she might be gone. Then you better pray she holds on. I turned and walked toward the roof exit. At the door, I stopped, and without looking back, I dropped my final line. Oh, by the way, remember that supplemental operating agreement regarding cross-ownership of shares? The one you signed last month? You might want to reread Section 17 carefully. I stepped into the elevator and hit the lobby button. When the doors closed, I leaned against the metal wall and closed my eyes. The crescent-shaped marks my nails had left in my palms were still throbbing, but my mind was incredibly clear. He would undoubtedly go back and review that agreement. And when he did, he would discover exactly what Section 17 said. In the event that any shareholder is found liable for a severe breach of ethical standards or illegal acts supported by adequate evidence, all voting and dividend rights belonging to the offending party shall automatically transfer to the innocent party without the need for further negotiation or board approval. I had slipped that agreement into a stack of routine corporate documents the month before when he asked me to sort out the paperwork. He signed the entire stack without reading a single page because he saw me simply as a good wife. Docile, unambitious, content to stay in his shadow. It never occurred to him that a good wife could also be a ruthless corporate litigator, one who never steps into a battle unprepared. Walking out of the hospital, I made a call. Lauren, I need a rush job. Cut the 3-day time frame down to 2. I'll pay double whatever it takes. No problem. Anything else? I took a deep breath. Yes, run another test for me. What kind of test? A paternity test. I'll bring you the samples today. After hanging up, I started the car. In the rearview mirror, the gray and white hospital building grew smaller and smaller. I didn't give it a second glance. There are places you leave and never look back at. The 48 hours after I left the hospital were the most productive of my life. The irony was that for the last 6 years, I had dedicated that exact same level of productivity to patching the holes in Chris's startup. Now I simply shifted gears and aimed those cannons directly at him. The first night I didn't go home. I went straight to my downtown law firm and used my private office to get everything in order. The partner wing had 24/7 keycard access, and Chris couldn't get in. First, I created a mirror copy of all the critical files on Apex Tech's servers. I didn't just download them to a hard drive. If he found out, he could accuse me of corporate espionage. I used an electronic notary service. Every file was timestamped and sealed with its corresponding hash, giving it irrefutable legal weight. It's a basic lawyer trick. Bulletproof the evidence before the opponent even realizes they're at war. When the backup finished, I pulled up the scanned copy of that supplemental operating agreement and reread Section 17 in black and white. Chris's signature and initials were right there. But that clause alone wasn't enough. The prerequisite for it to take effect was that adequate evidence existed. In other words, I needed an airtight, undeniable chain of custody proving that Chris's actions constituted severe ethical violations or illegal acts. What did I have so far? 1. The patent transfer memo and the state registries proving the illegal siphoning of the company's core assets. 2. The WhatsApp screenshots with Dr. Evans proving the conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud. 3. The ultrasound proving his infidelity. Those 3 things together were enough to trigger Section 17, but I wasn't in a rush, because Chris was bound to make an even bigger mistake. His main weakness wasn't greed or even callousness. It was that he always overestimated his control over a situation. He believed any problem could be talked away, that anyone could be manipulated with his tears and his sincerity. What he didn't know was that the Audrey standing in front of him could no longer be manipulated. The next morning, Chris called me 17 times. I didn't answer a single one. At 11 a.m., he FaceTimed me. I picked up. Audrey, where the hell are you? Do you have any idea how Madison is doing right now? I know. I'm taking care of some things. What things could possibly be more important than a human life? I didn't answer his question. Instead, I said something that seemed completely irrelevant. Chris, how much operating capital is left in the company's accounts? He was taken aback for a second. Why are you asking that? You said Madison's family went bankrupt. The upcoming surgery, the post-op rehab, the ICU stays, all of that is going to cost at least another $250,000. Where do you plan to get that money? Silence fell on the other end of the line. I waited 5 seconds and then said in the most casual tone possible, there should be an accounts receivable payment that hit the corporate account last month. About $400,000. You're thinking about that money, aren't you? What do you mean? Nothing. Just reminding you that that money is a client retainer, and it's sitting in a corporate trust account. If you use it for personal expenses, it won't be classified as a marital property dispute. It's wire fraud and embezzlement, a federal crime. Audrey! His voice suddenly escalated into a shout. Whose side are you even on? The law's side. I hung up. And then I did something very specific. I deliberately left a vulnerability in the company's financial management software. Specifically, I changed the payment approval process for that $400,000 from dual authorization to single authorization. That meant Chris could wire the money out all on his own. It was a trap. I knew Chris would touch that money. He had already handed the patents over to Madison's family, and he had no other way to get liquid cash. Madison's medical bills were a bottomless pit, and he could never abandon his role as the heroic savior, shouldering all the responsibility for that woman. His vanity would do the rest of the work for me. I just had to wait. While I waited, I handled another matter. Lauren texted me. I have the samples, running the paternity test now. The rush analysis will take about 36 hours. Also, the raw data from your physical and the results are in. Last month, your actual ALT level was 91, not 42. The raw data and the final report issued by the clinic do not match at all. The clinic has already contacted me, saying they want to explain everything. Let them wait. One more thing. Lauren's tone grew hesitant. Audrey, this paternity test. Where did you get the baby sample? I let out a small laugh. The day before at the hospital, I had deliberately walked into the waiting room next to the ICU. Madison's mother was keeping watch, and next to her was a stroller with a 2-month-old baby, the perfect crystallization of that true love Chris had talked about. When I walked over, Madison's mother was dozing. I leaned in, looked at the baby, and naturally picked up a tiny sock he had kicked out of the stroller. The epithelial cells on it were more than enough to extract DNA. As for Chris's sample, that was even easier. A hair from his comb in our master bathroom. "You don't need to know that," I replied to Lauren. "I just need you to give me the result." "Understood. Be careful." At 2 p.m. the next day, a bank alert chimed on my phone. Because I was an authorized cosigner on the corporate account, any transfer over $50,000 automatically pushed a duplicate alert to my phone. The message read, "Dear customer, a wire transfer has been initiated from the corporate account ending in 3847 at 14:03 Eastern Standard Time. Amount, $380,000. He actually did it. I stared at the text, took a deep breath, and dialed my colleague Ryan's number. "Ryan, I need you to trigger an internal financial audit." "For which company?" "Apex Tech, my husband's company." There was a cough on the other end. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure. Submit the paperwork directly to the bank's fraud detection and compliance department. A suspicious transfer of $380,000 just left a corporate trust account heading for a private account. The conditions to trigger the FinCEN algorithm have been met." "Audrey." Ryan's voice sounded complex. "You know what this means, right? The moment the bank's anti-money laundering team steps in, all associated accounts will be frozen. I know he's your husband, but he will become the prime suspect in a federal embezzlement case." There wasn't a trace of hesitation in my voice. The status of being my husband does not grant him immunity from federal law. Ryan paused for a few seconds. "I'll file the paperwork before the end of the business day." "Thank you." After hanging up, I stood by my office window watching the Seattle traffic below. The setting sun painted the city in shades of orange. It looked warm, creating the illusion that Constance still existed in this world. But I no longer believed in illusions. I picked up my phone and texted Chris. "Still thinking about the surgery. I'll give you an answer tomorrow." He replied instantly. "Thank you, Audrey. I knew you wouldn't abandon us in our time of need." I stared at that "thank you" for a long time. Over 6 years, he had said that word countless times. "Thank you for reviewing the contract. Thank you for coming to the meeting. Thank you for understanding me. Thank you for your sacrifices." Every thank you was like a sugar-coated nail driven softly into my bones. The pain made me mistakenly believe it was sweetness. Now the sugar had melted. Only the nails remained. I locked my phone, screen went back to my desk, and opened a new Word document. The header read, "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage. Petitioner, Audrey Foster. Respondent, Christopher Reed." My fingers hovered over the keyboard, froze for 3 seconds, and then began to type. When the divorce petition was half written, my office door swung open. It wasn't Chris. It was my mother. She was wearing her beige trench coat, her hair neatly pulled back. In her hands, she held a canvas tote bag full of Tupperware containers with soup. If it weren't for the unmistakable anxiety at the corners of her eyes, you would have thought she was just dropping by to bring her daughter lunch. "Mom, how did you get here?" "What do you mean, how did I get here?" She dropped the bag onto my desk. Her voice was sharp as a needle. "Chris called me. He said you're refusing to help, that this girl Madison is on her deathbed, and you're refusing to sign the papers." I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and looked at her. "And what else did he say?" "He said you haven't been home in 2 days and that you're ignoring his calls." "Audrey, I am your mother. I know you're hurting, but you can't be this ruthless. This is a human life. If you don't sign those papers, your conscience will haunt you for the rest of your days. Mom, do you even know what this surgery entails? Of course I do. You're just donating a little piece of your liver. They would cut out 60% of my liver, I replied calmly. A minimum of 2 weeks in the hospital, 3 to 6 months of recovery, risk of surgical mortality. Furthermore, my liver function is already compromised at baseline. The actual risk to my life is substantially higher. My mother's mouth opened, closed, and opened again. But the doctor said your tests were normal. That report is fake. Chris paid people to forge my medical results. Silence. My mother's fingers gripped the handles of the canvas bag so tightly, her knuckles turned white. I thought she would be shocked. I thought she would be furious, that she would take my side, or at least say, I'm going to go give him a piece of my mind. Instead, she said, even if there's something wrong with the report, you can retake the tests, and if the new results come back normal, just sign it. I closed my eyes. It was in that precise moment that I understood something profound. The reason I had backed down step by step in this marriage wasn't just because of Chris. It had roots in the upbringing I had received since I was a little girl. A girl must be obedient. She must be understanding. She must sacrifice herself for the greater good. My mother wasn't a bad person. She simply truly believed that a woman's body, career, and feelings were worth less than saving a life. Mom, I opened my eyes. If the liver were for a complete stranger, would you let me do it? Of course not. Then why is it okay if it's for Chris's ex-girlfriend? Just because she's dying, her life is worth more than my health. A person is on her deathbed, and you're still haggling over petty details? I'm not haggling. I'm making a rational, legal deduction. I cut her off. A person whose body is unfit to donate gets on an operating table under the cover of a forged medical certificate. If something goes wrong, who takes responsibility? Chris didn't even bother to give me my real lab results. My mother stayed quiet. Her eyes grew red, but not out of compassion for me. She felt I was taking things too far. Your father found out about this. His blood pressure spiked, she finally said. Tell him to take his blood pressure medication. I stood up and pushed the canvas bag back toward her. Mom, I don't have time to fight with you. Go home. I will handle this. She slammed the door on her way out. After the door clicked shut, I sat in my chair for a long time. The smell of chicken noodle soup from the Tupperware filled the room. It turned my stomach. My phone screen lit up. This time it was Chris's Facebook feed. He had posted a long public status update with a blurry photo of Madison lying in a hospital bed. Her face was hidden, but every word of the text pointed at me. Some people have the chance to give life, but condemn others to die. I don't blame her. I only blame my own helplessness. If I had money, I could find a donor overseas. If I had power, I could move her up the transplant list. But I have nothing. I only have a wife. A wife who isn't even willing to save a life. The comment section was a bloodbath. Oh my God, how can anyone be so cold? Hang in there, Chris. A woman like that isn't worth it. She won't even lift a finger to help. My blood type doesn't match, but have them test me. I carefully read every single comment. I took screenshots and saved them all. Then I checked his privacy settings and realized he had done something specific before posting. He had hidden it from me. He thought I wouldn't see it, but he forgot we had mutual friends. We had run in the same Seattle tech circles for 6 years, and within 3 minutes, someone had screenshotted it and sent it to me. I gathered all the images and saved them in a folder titled Evidence of Coercion via Public Harassment. At 9 p.m., Chris's parents arrived. His father and mother were much more direct than my own parents. They didn't bring soup or exchange pleasantries. Walking into my office, they sat on the sofa across from me like two judges. "Audrey," Chris's father began, his tone carrying the unquestionable authority of an elder. "We've heard what happened with Chris. Look, in his youth, he ended up in debt to that girl. A man has to live with a clear conscience." "I agree, Dad. Who exactly owes whom?" "He owes that girl. They were each other's first love. First love is first love, but ultimately, he chose to marry me. Since he made that choice, he must take responsibility for his marriage, not pay off his guilt to someone else using my internal organs," his mother chimed in. "You are speaking in an incredibly selfish way. A person could die. Can't you be a little more generous?" I looked at her. "Mom, if I were the one who needed a liver right now, Chris would drop to his knees, begging strangers to donate." Chris's mother choked on her own words. His father stood up, his face darkening like a storm cloud. "Audrey, your attitude means you have no intention of saving her." "My attitude is this until the safety of my health is absolutely guaranteed. I will not sign a single legal document." "And how exactly do we guarantee that?" "By having an independent hospital completely unaffiliated with Chris and Dr. Evans conduct a second preoperative evaluation. If the results show I can donate safely, I'll consider it." That sentence was purely a stalling tactic. I knew a new evaluation would take at least 5 to 7 days, and by then, everything that needed to happen would have already happened. Chris's father stared at me for a long time, then let out a cold laugh. "Fine. We'll see." After they left, I was left alone in a silence as deafening as a downpour. Outside the window, the city lights continued to shine, but my world no longer had anything in common with the one from 24 hours ago. Both sets of parents, the pressure of social media, the coercion from the hospital, everything was pushing me in a single direction. Sign. Let them cut out your liver. Sacrifice yourself. What they didn't know was that I was already positioned on the other side of the chessboard. I opened my laptop and checked an email from the bank's anti-fraud compliance department regarding anomalous transactions in Apex Tech's corporate account. A risk mitigation audit has been initiated. Associated accounts are temporarily frozen. Estimated audit timeframe, 5 to 7 business days. I closed the laptop and closed my eyes. Accounts frozen. Now Chris would discover he couldn't access the money. He would panic and, in his panic, he would do something incredibly stupid. All I had to do was stand perfectly still in the eye of the storm, watching emotionlessly as he took one step after another into the grave he had dug for himself. The news of the frozen accounts reached Chris on the morning of the third day. I knew because at 7:30 a.m., he called my cell directly, avoiding FaceTime. In the middle of the night, he had been playing the role of the tragic, loving husband on social media. But by 7:30, he had abandoned the image entirely. "Audrey, why the hell are the company accounts frozen?" His voice sounded high-pitched and frantic. There wasn't a trace of the tender, pitiful tone from 2 days prior. "Frozen." My voice projected perfect confusion. "When did that happen?" "Today. The accountant called me this morning and said no wire transfers would go through from the corporate account. The bank said some anti-fraud review protocol got triggered." "Did you do something, Audrey?" "Chris, the bank's compliance algorithms are automated. They don't freeze accounts just because I asked them to." My tone was as patient as if I were advising a client. "Don't panic. Tell me exactly which account." "The main operating account ending in 3847. "Have there been any unusual transfers from that account recently?" Absolute silence on the other end of the line for 3 seconds. You checked the ledger. His voice dropped. He was on guard like a cat with an arched back. I am the company's legal counsel. If there's movement in the trust account, I get a notification. Chris, the day before yesterday, you transferred $380,000 from the corporate account to a private account. What is that money for? More silence. I could perfectly picture his face in that moment. Lips pressed tight, eyes darting back and forth, his brain frantically searching for an excuse that would convince me without revealing too much. It's for Madison's surgery. He finally told the truth. Her family doesn't have the money. I just wanted to put down a deposit. You used client retainer funds from a corporate trust account to pay for personal medical expenses without replenishing them? Do you have $380,000 in your personal checking account to cover it? No, but the revenue from the new projects will come in next month. Whether the revenue comes in next month is one issue. The fact that right now you just illegally embezzled client funds is a completely different issue. Chris, do you genuinely not understand the legal classification of what you just did? Audrey, he finally exploded. I am your husband, not a suspect on the stand. Stop talking to me in that tone. Okay, I'll change my tone. My voice softened. I used exactly that sweet, understanding, loyal wife tone he knew so well. Honey, don't worry. A frozen account is just a temporary compliance review. If they don't find any structural issues within 7 business days, the hold lifts automatically. You just need to prepare documentation proving the origin of the funds and their legitimate business purpose. Then you submit it to the bank. Really? I'm a lawyer. I deal with this all the time. Then you can help me handle it. 2 seconds, making the pause seem like hesitation instead of calculation. I can, but I need you to send me the statements for all the company's financial accounts for the last 6 months, including your personal accounts. I need to see if there are other transactions that might have spooked FinCEN. My personal accounts. The bank audits all associated accounts. Since you're the CEO, your personal accounts are subject to review. You don't have to give them to me. But if you don't, the bank will subpoena them directly by court order, and you'll end up explaining this to federal investigators instead of me. A long sigh came from the other end of the line. Fine. I'll tell accounting to send you the statements. I'll send my personal ones too. After hanging up, I picked up my cold coffee and took a sip. He had taken the bait. Chris sent the financial statements that afternoon. When I opened the files in my office, I discovered that, as expected, he had scrubbed them. The corporate statements were complete, but he only provided his personal statements for the last 3 months. Whatever happened before that, he deleted. But it was enough. In those 3 months of statements, I saw 7 separate transfers to the same routing number, totaling $120,000. Recipient name, Madison Clark. The oldest transfer was from 4 months ago. In other words, long before Madison ended up in the hospital. Chris was already sending her money. This wasn't charity for a sick woman. It was a secret allowance. I compiled those transactions into a spreadsheet, noting the date, amount, and recipient, and forwarded it to Ryan. Ryan replied quickly, "This data, combined with the $380,000 wire, is more than enough for the FBI to open a formal investigation for embezzlement. Do you want to pull the trigger?" "Not yet. Wait for the paternity test results," I replied. What does a paternity test have to do with a federal corporate fraud case? A direct link. I didn't elaborate because until I had the results, it was just a theory. That night, Lauren called. "The results are in." Her voice carried a trace of shock. "That baby." I compared the 2 samples. The probability of the male DNA matching the baby's DNA is 0. I tapped the desk softly with my finger. Are you absolutely sure? I ran the test twice. The results are identical. The probability of paternity exclusion is 99.99%. Audrey, that baby is not Chris's. Not Chris's. The child he begged me to sacrifice my liver for. The woman he forged my medical records for, siphoned company assets for, and turned his whole family against me for. The baby she was carrying wasn't even his. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling, suddenly struck by the pure, absolute absurdity of it all. He fancied himself the tragic hero of a grand romance, willing to sacrifice everything for his first love and his unborn child. But in reality, from beginning to end, he was nothing more than a carefully chosen mark for Madison and her family. A mark with a successful startup, and a naive wife with an ideal liver match. Lauren, print me 2 copies of the report, I said. 1 official and 1 backup. Okay, when do you plan to use them? I thought for a moment. The day he puts himself behind bars. Hanging up, I turned back to my laptop and opened the unfinished divorce petition. The cursor blinked under the relief requested section. I added a new line. Petitioner requests that the court find respondent guilty of severe ethical and fiduciary violations during the marriage, and that, pursuant to corporate bylaws and Section 17 of the supplemental agreement, award petitioner full control and dividend rights of Apex Tech LLC. When I finished, I reviewed the text without unnecessary adjectives. Every word was precise, like a federal statute. Before shutting down the computer, I made one last entry in the Notes app. All the pieces are now on the board. I just have to let him make the final move. Night had fallen over Seattle. I stood by the window for a long time. My reflection in the glass showed a face without makeup, with calm, steady eyes. After 6 years of marriage, the warm, accommodating veil had finally been ripped away, exposing the face of a litigator. A serene, precise litigator who would no longer show an ounce of mercy. On the 4th day of my absence, Chris finally lost his patience. And it wasn't because Madison's attending physician told him the artificial liver support machine was losing effectiveness. If a transplant isn't performed within 72 hours, Madison's survival probability drops below 10%. 72 hours. 3 days. That countdown hung over Chris's head like a guillotine. And I, the only matching donor, was in his eyes the rope that could stop the blade. The problem was, he no longer held the rope. At 3 p.m., a push notification from my home security system popped up on my phone. Yes, I had installed Ring cameras inside the house. Not recently, but 2 years ago. The reason was standard burglary protection. Chris hadn't objected. He even helped adjust the camera angles. It never crossed his mind that one day, those cameras would be pointed directly at him. The notification read, "Motion detected in living room." I opened the live feed. Chris was sitting on the living room sofa. In front of him on the coffee table was a stack of documents. Standing next to him was Dr. Evans. Both looked incredibly grim. The air was thick with the atmosphere of a clandestine conspiracy. I turned up the volume. "Where is she?" Dr. Evans's voice was tight. "We can't delay the surgery any longer." I called her firm. She didn't answer. I went to her office. Reception said she wasn't there. Chris buried his face in his hands. His voice sounded exhausted. "Alan, can you think of any other way?" "Another way?" Dr. Evans let out a bitter laugh. "What other way? In this entire city, she is the only matching donor. Why do you think I risked my medical license forging those labs?" "What do we do now?" Dr. Evans paused, then lowered his voice. "There is one way, but the risk is enormous." "Tell me." "The informed consent form." Sign it for her. My finger froze over the phone screen. In the video, Chris looked up. His face displayed a complex sequence of emotions. It wasn't hesitation. It was a cost-benefit analysis. He was weighing the probability of getting caught against the cost of abandoning the surgery. I can forge her signature, Chris said slowly. But doesn't the protocol now require biometric verification for a major organ donation? Yes, a signature and a thumbprint on the physical document, Dr. Evans replied. You can lift her print from a mug she normally uses, or her computer mouse with clear tape. It'll pass the scanner's visual check. Wait, Chris interrupted. And if she contests it later? The surgery will already be done. It'll be a fait accompli. Do you really think she's going to sue her own husband for forgery? Worst case scenario, she makes a scene, ignores you for a few days, and then everything goes back to normal. The corners of Chris's mouth tightened. I couldn't tell if it was a bitter smile or a cold one. She's not the type to just let things go. Then you decide. Dr. Evans threw his hands up. Either you forge the signature, we do the surgery, and you hope she doesn't press charges, or you watch Madison die. Your call. In the video, Chris stood up, walked to the coffee table, picked up a pen, and reached for the documents. Give it to me. I watched as he carefully traced Audrey Foster in the donor's signature box. When he finished, he went to the kitchen and brought back a glass tumbler, the same one I usually drink water from. Carefully, he lifted a smudge from the glass using a piece of clear Scotch tape and pressed it onto the thumbprint confirmation box next to the signature. His movements were fluid, practiced, and deeply unsettling. I downloaded the entire clip and synced it directly to my electronic notary service. Timestamp 1547. Chris, I whispered to myself. You've finally hammered the last nail into your own coffin. Forging someone else's signature and thumbprint for medical-informed consent wasn't a gray area. It was aggravated identity theft and federal healthcare fraud. And in the specific context of organ transplantation, it violated the National Organ Transplant Act regarding the voluntary consent of the donor. That charge alone was enough for a stiff federal sentence. Coupled with corporate embezzlement and falsifying medical records, Chris would be buried under the prison. But I didn't act immediately. The surgery hadn't started yet. If I called the cops right then, the surgery would be canceled. Madison might die, and Chris would go to trial with the halo of a martyr, crying in front of a jury that he only wanted to save a life. Public opinion might even turn against me. I needed to wait for the exact surgical moment. A moment when he could no longer hide behind beautiful fairy tales of profound love. I made a call. Ryan, track something for me. 3 days ago, Chris wired $380,000 out of the corporate trust account. Where exactly did that money end up? I'm already on it. Preliminary data shows it hit Madison's personal checking account and then was immediately split into 3 transfers. $340,000 to Gregory Clark, $10,000 to Madison Biotech, LLC, and $30,000 was withdrawn in cash. A cash withdrawal of $30,000? Yes, that same afternoon, using Madison's ID. But she's in the ICU. Her family members withdrew it for her. I finished his thought for him. Her family took her card and her ID and walked into a bank branch. Correct. And the rest of the funds in Madison Biotech? The next day, it was wired to an offshore preventive medicine clinic in the Cayman Islands. I'm currently figuring out who the true ultimate beneficial owner of that LLC is. I closed my eyes. Everything confirmed my suspicions. Madison's family never had any intention of using all that money for her surgery. They were liquidating and hiding assets. Chris believed he was desperately trying to save the woman he loved. In reality, he was just a meticulously chosen ATM. And the baby that wasn't even his, was the biggest button on that ATM. "Keep digging," I said. "Track it down to the last cent." "Copy that." Then I texted Lauren. "Can I get the official paternity report tomorrow? The one with the forensic lab's seal?" "Yes, I'll have it ready." "Then prepare one more thing." "What?" "Chris's DNA and the baby's don't match. I need the report to also include a Y chromosome paternal lineage genealogical analysis for the baby. Can you determine the general biological circle of the father?" "If I have comparison samples, yes. Do you have one?" I thought for a second. "Gregory Clark, Madison's father. Run a kinship check." 3 seconds of absolute silence on the other end of the line. "Are you implying, do you suspect that baby?" "I'm not suspecting anything. I just want to rule out all variables." Lauren's tone turned dead serious. "I'll do it. But Audrey, if things are the way you think they are, then Chris wasn't the only one who got played." "I know, exactly. That's why I want to get to the bottom of this. Not to absolve Chris of his guilt. His crimes were his own choices. They had nothing to do with whether Madison's family was a gang of con artists. But because when the time came for the final confrontation, I wanted him to clearly see that he sacrificed his wife's health, his company's assets, and his own future. And in return, he didn't get an unforgettable love story. He got a filthy lie from beginning to end. That would be the true fatal blow. Not against the law, but against his ego. The day after forging my signature, Chris returned to the hospital with the fake informed consent. I wasn't there, but the hospital's security cameras and check-in logs captured exactly what happened. Later, those logs became state's evidence. At 9 a.m., Chris handed the documents to the head nurse of the surgical ward. The signature and the thumbprint raised no alarms. Dr. Evans signed his confirmation clearance on the preoperative evaluation sheet. Preparation for a live organ transplant surgery officially began without the donor even being present. They planned to complete all the paperwork in my name, without my knowledge, and once everything was ready, trick me into getting on the operating table. Or maybe they never planned to use my liver at all. That thought crossed my mind while I was sitting in Ryan's office, laying out the expanded bank fraud compliance report. The situation was much worse than we had anticipated. Ryan adjusted his glasses and pushed the documents toward me. The bank's FinCEN audit found a massive issue. Over the last 8 months, Apex Tech funneled a total of $1,700,000 through 6 shell companies using cyclical transfers. $1,700,000? Yes. Each individual transaction was kept just under the $10,000 threshold to avoid triggering automatic currency transaction reports, the CTRs. Smurfing. The money bounced through 3 or 4 transit LLCs and finally landed at a final destination, an offshore account in a tax haven under the name Gregory Clark. I tapped the desk with my finger. 8 months, $1,700,000, 6 shell companies. This is no longer simple embezzlement. Ryan, how does the DOJ classify this? If the source funds were client retainers or investor capital, wire fraud, and illegal fundraising. If it was operating capital from the company, aggravated embezzlement and money laundering. Regardless of the classification, $1,700,000 is a major federal felony. What's the bank's next step? The Anti-Money Laundering Desk has already filed an automated suspicious activity report, ASAR, with FinCEN. Standard protocol dictates that the FBI's Financial Crimes Division will initiate a field investigation within 7 business days. I leaned back and closed my eyes. 7 business days. In other words, counting from today, the FBI would step in by Wednesday at the latest. Chris knew nothing about this. His head was full only of how to save Madison and how to drag me into surgery. He believed the account freeze was just a routine compliance hiccup. He didn't realize that the financial currents he had so carefully disguised had already fractured the dam. The compliance system was the impending flood, and I hadn't even created the storm. It was the result of the liabilities Chris had racked up day after day. I just opened the floodgates a little early. Ryan, prepare some documents for me. Which ones? Compile all the evidence we have so far. The patent transfer records, the WhatsApp screenshots about the forged medical data, the bank wire logs, the Ring camera video where he forges the consent. Package it all up to the standards of a formal federal criminal complaint. Ryan looked at me with a complex expression. You want to file the complaint yourself? Not now. When the FBI shows up on their own, I replied. And when they do, I won't be the whistleblower. I'll be a cooperating witness. The perception will be completely different. Ryan thought for a second and understood immediately. If I initiated the complaint, Chris's defense attorney could build a narrative of a vindictive wife trying to destroy her husband during a messy divorce. But if the bank's automated algorithms sounded the alarm and the FBI opened the case independently, it became an objective financial crime. My role shifted from accuser to victim and key witness. That shift was critical for both legal and reputational leverage. Understood, Ryan nodded. I'll have it all compiled tonight. Leaving Ryan's office, I lingered for a moment in the firm's stairwell. Down the hall, someone was talking on the phone, their muffled laughter echoing softly. For an instant, it felt like the most normal workday in the world. But I knew that somewhere in the city, in a hospital, a man was using my name to prep for surgery. On the bank's servers, ASAR was hitting the desks of federal agents. And I remained perfectly still in the center, like a precision chess piece, waiting for all the lines to converge on a single point. My phone rang. It was Chris. Audrey, where are you? It's noisy. Can you come to the hospital today? Dr. Evans said there's a final confirmation protocol before the surgery. You have to be present in person. I almost let out a laugh. He had forged my signature. He had pushed the procedure to the absolute final step. And then he realized there was a legal safeguard he couldn't bypass. Final confirmation for a live organ donation requires the physical identification of the donor and their verbal consent. It's not something you can forge with a piece of tape. Sure, I said. What time? Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Can you make it? I can. Audrey, his voice suddenly softened. Thank you. There it was again. Thank you. I stared at his contact photo on the screen. It was a picture from our wedding day. He was smiling so hard his eyes crinkled into crescent moons, looking like the warmest man on earth. You're welcome. I hung up. Then I opened the Notes app and typed out the plan for tomorrow. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., final visit to the hospital. Not to sign, not for surgery, but to close the net. I slipped the phone into my coat pocket and stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, I saw my reflection in the polished metal. Very calm. So calm it was scary. But I knew that calm wasn't coldness. It was the absolute equilibrium of someone who had been cornered, had evaluated all options, and had made peace with the outcome. Because from that moment on, I didn't have to make any more decisions. Chris had made them all for me. On the 5th morning at 7 a.m., I received 2 text messages. The first was from Ryan. The evidence package is fully prepped. Also, the FBI moved faster than expected. The bank escalated the SAR last night. They'll probably raid the office today. The second was from Lauren. The official paternity report is ready, and that genealogical analysis you asked for yielded results. You better sit down before reading this. I opened the PDF Lauren sent. When I finished reading it, I was genuinely glad I was sitting down. Biological father of the child. Based on comparative analysis of the Y chromosome, there is a high confidence match with the Clark family line, which meant that child, with almost absolute certainty, was the product of incest within the Clark family. Who exactly the father was couldn't be determined from this report, but the direction was clear. Madison's family had a hereditary liver disease, and that child had a high probability of inheriting that genetic defect. They never needed Chris's love. They needed a wealthy scapegoat capable of continuously injecting cash into their accounts. A scapegoat with resources, money, and a wife whose liver was a perfect medical match. Chris was handpicked, and I, from the very beginning, was nothing more than his backup organ bank. I locked the report in my firm's safe, along with the rest of the evidence. Then, I didn't go to the hospital. I went to SeaTac Airport. I had booked the tickets 2 days ago. Destination Copenhagen, Denmark. A 3-year joint PhD program at the intersection of medical law and ethics was waiting for me. I had received the acceptance letter 2 years ago, but gave it up to keep Chris's startup running. This time, I wasn't going to wait. On the way to the airport, I sent Chris one final text. I do not consent to the surgery. Do not attempt to contact me from this day forward. 3 seconds after it sent, my phone rang. I answered. Audrey, have you lost your mind? His voice contained no pleading, just hysterical rage. Do you have any idea what you're doing? Are you murdering someone? I'm protecting myself. Protecting yourself? What the hell is there to protect? Madison threw up blood again. This morning the doctor said, if we don't operate today... Chris, I cut him off. My voice was as smooth as a glass lake. I have 3 things to tell you. Listen carefully. First, you forged the informed consent form. The signature is fake. You lifted my thumbprint from a water glass. I have it all on high-definition video. The breathing on the other end of the line caught sharply. Second, over the last 8 months, through 6 shell companies, you transferred $1,700,000 from the corporate accounts to an offshore account owned by Madison's father. The FinCEN system flagged it automatically. The FBI is coming for you today. Absolute silence. A long, suffocating silence. I could hear him swallow hard. Third, I paused, watching the gray outlines of Seattle blur past the car window. The woman you're trying so desperately to save, the baby she's carrying in her womb, is not yours. What? I already got the paternity results, certified by a state forensic lab. The child has absolutely no biological relationship to you. Impossible. You're lying. It's my baby. Maddie said so. Whatever Madison said is irrelevant. DNA doesn't lie. Heavy, ragged breathing echoed through the phone, as if someone had him by the throat. How? Where did you get the baby sample? You don't need to know that. Audrey, what the hell are you trying to accomplish? I closed my eyes. The wind outside the car was fierce, whistling through the door seals. This was my final conversation with that man. 6 years of marriage, 6 years of compromises, 6 years of suppressing my own identity, 6 years of genuinely believing he loved me, compressed into these final minutes of a phone call. I'm not trying to accomplish anything, I said quietly. but every word felt carved in stone. I just don't want to be your backup organ bank anymore. From beginning to end, in your eyes, I was just a set of functions. When you needed a lawyer, I was your free counsel. When you needed money, I was your ATM. When you needed an organ, I became a donor. Did you ever, even for a single second, look at me like a human being? Audrey, When did you find out about Madison's illness? Last year. Last year. You knew for an entire year. And for a whole year, you played the role of the loving husband while secretly sending her money. You transferred patents and coordinated with corrupt doctors. You even dragged me in for a full physical. Not because you cared about my health, but to see if my liver was a match right. There was no sound on the other end, not even breathing. Why did I let you treat me like that? I spoke as if I were talking to myself. Because I thought loving someone meant sacrificing yourself. I thought if I was good enough, obedient enough, and understanding enough, you would see me. But you didn't. You never really saw me. Audrey, please. I took a deep breath. Chris, survive. And then, sitting in a federal prison, take a long, hard look at yourself and ask yourself who you really lived this life for. I hung up and powered off the phone. The Uber sped down I-5. The streetlights on either side flashed by like golden comets. I leaned back against the leather seat, my vision slightly blurry. It wasn't tears. I didn't have any left. It was a massive, hollow emptiness, as if a room inside my chest had been completely cleared out. Empty, but finally clean. When I arrived at SeaTac, it was 9:10 a.m. Boarding was in an hour and a half. I went through security, sat by the window at my gate, and pulled out a brand new iPhone. I had bought a new SIM card before leaving. The old phone remained in the firm's safe, along with the evidence. When the time came, Ryan would turn everything over to the federal prosecutors. The new phone had exactly 4 contacts: Lauren, Ryan, my mother, and my PhD advisor in Denmark. I texted Ryan, "I'm at the airport. The rest is in your hands." Ryan replied with a single word, "Understood." Then he added, "FBI agents entered the Apex Tech office at 9:30. Chris should still be at the hospital. He'll come running back soon." I replied, "Why?" "Because he just found out his accounts are frozen. The feds are auditing his company, and the kid isn't his. The only thing he can do now is rush to the office to try and destroy evidence, but he doesn't know." Right. He doesn't know that all the electronic evidence has already been notarized and locked on the blockchain. He's going back to shred paper copies that carry much less legal weight. Ryan paused, then typed, "You're brutal." I looked at those 2 words and the corners of my mouth curled up. Not brutal. I just spent 6 years finally learning not to show weakness to those who don't deserve it. When they announced boarding, I stood up, grabbed my carry-on, and walked toward the gate. As I passed, I glanced sideways at the massive departure board. The flights blinked like a giant web. Every node led to a new life. I chose the farthest one. This wasn't an escape. It was a launch. The morning I left, everything unfolded exactly as I had modeled it. Ryan later filled me in on the details, piece by piece. He was there that day as my attorney, and he remembered every scene with painful clarity. At 9:28 a.m., 3 FBI agents from the Financial Crimes Division walked into the Apex Tech building. They flashed a federal search warrant and the FinCEN Suspicious Activity Report. They demanded all financial ledgers from the last fiscal year. The head of accounting paled with terror and immediately started frantically calling Chris's cell. At 9:35, Chris answered. According to Ryan, based on the subsequent security footage, Chris was in the hospital parking lot at that moment. After finishing his call with me, he collapsed against his car door as if all the oxygen had been sucked from his lungs. It took him 10 seconds after the accountant's call to snap back to reality. He started the engine. The drive from the hospital to the office usually takes 40 minutes. That day, he did it in 22. At 9:57, Chris burst through the glass doors of his company. He was met by a special agent and Ryan. "Christopher Reed," the agent flashed his badge. "FBI. We're executing a search warrant on suspicion of federal wire fraud and embezzlement at Apex Tech LLC. We need your full cooperation." Ryan said Chris's first reaction wasn't panic, but pure rage. "Audrey sent you." He glared at Ryan furiously. "She reported me to the police." Ryan replied calmly, "Chris, this investigation was automatically triggered by the bank's anti-money laundering algorithms. FinCEN alerted the Bureau. Audrey had nothing to do with it. I am here representing Audrey Foster as her legal counsel. I am present to cooperate with federal authorities and protect my client's legal interests." Legal interests. Chris's voice cracked. "She's my wife. This is our company. What interests are you protecting?" "Precisely because she is a co-owner and investor. She has a legal right to know where the assets were siphoned," Ryan said smoothly. "Furthermore, Chris, I have a copy of the Supplemental Operating Agreement. You actually read it, didn't you?" Ryan handed a copy of the document to the FBI agent. Seeing that agreement, Chris's face completely collapsed. Ryan said it wasn't just a change in expression. It was the look of a man watching a skyscraper fall, suddenly realizing he had dug out the foundation himself, shovel by shovel. That agreement. Chris's throat was dry as a bone. When was it signed? "The 15th of last month. You signed and initialed it yourself," Ryan reminded him. "It is legally binding and notarized." The special agent looked at the agreement, then at Chris, and spoke dryly. "Mr. Reed, you need to come with us to the field office to answer some questions regarding the $1,700,000 transferred through 6 affiliated LLCs to an offshore account over the past 8 months, as well as the $380,000 transferred from a corporate trust account 5 days ago. You will need to explain the origin and legitimate business purpose of those funds." "I can explain." "You can explain it at the field office." As they led Chris away in handcuffs, his employees lined the hallway watching. Ryan said no one made a sound. It was as quiet as a morgue. But the story didn't end at the office. At 10:15 a.m., after the agents took Chris away, Ryan drove straight to Seattle General Hospital. Because he knew there was one last loose end to tie up, that forged informed consent form. When Ryan arrived at the surgical ward, Dr. Evans was making final preparations. The surgical team was scrubbed in and ready. The anesthesiologist was prepping the meds. Everything was moving forward according to the fraudulent document. "Excuse me, the donor for this procedure is Audrey Foster, correct?" Ryan flashed his Washington State Bar Association card at the operating room doors. Dr. Evans peeked out from the sterile area. Seeing the legal credentials, he instantly went pale. "I represent Audrey Foster. My client never signed any consent form for a liver donation. Where did you get this document?" The air in the pre-operative area froze. Dr. Evans opened his mouth, his eyes instinctively darting toward the signed consent resting on a clipboard near the OR doors. Ryan followed his gaze, walked over, and picked it up. This signature does not belong to Audrey Foster. Ryan spotted it at first glance. He was a corporate litigator. He made a living looking at signatures. Furthermore, for the record, Audrey Foster is currently on a commercial flight headed for Copenhagen. She physically could not have been in this hospital this morning. Dr. Evans started sweating profusely. If this document is a forgery, Ryan tapped the clipboard against the counter, then all participants in this fraud, including the responsible medical personnel, will face federal charges. Dr. Evans, are you absolutely sure you want to proceed with this surgery? Dr. Evans looked as if someone had hit the pause button on his life. He stood paralyzed, sweat rolling down the bridge of his nose onto his sterile scrubs. Rushed footsteps echoed down the hall. It was Madison's family. Gregory Clark came running up with Madison's mother. Gregory was in his 50s. He was bald and wearing a worn gray jacket. His face was a mask of desperation and fury. "Why hasn't the surgery started?" he bellowed. "My daughter is dying." Ryan blocked his path. "The surgery is suspended. The informed consent form is suspected to be a forgery. Until legal verification is conducted, this procedure cannot continue." "Who the hell are you?" Gregory's eyes narrowed. That look, Ryan told me later, told him everything he needed to know. These people were bad news. Audrey signed everything. Chris told me. "The signature is forged. We have high-definition video evidence." Gregory stood frozen for 3 seconds and then had a reaction that stunned everyone. He laughed. It wasn't a bitter or cold laugh. It was the laugh of a desperate con man who had nothing left to lose. "Then sue us," he spat on the floor. "If my daughter dies here today, none of you are walking away clean." Ryan ignored him and turned back to Dr. Evans. "I have already filed a formal injunction with the hospital's legal department and the state medical board. Until the donor's identity is verified, I demand you immediately halt all surgical preparations. Otherwise, the hospital will bear full joint liability." Dr. Evans finally spoke. His voice sounded like he hadn't drunk water in days. "Cancel the surgery. Tell the anesthesiologist and the nurses to stand down." Gregory's smirk vanished. He lunged forward and grabbed Dr. Evans by the collar of his surgical gown. "What did you just say?" "Don't you dare cancel it." "Let go of me." Dr. Evans pushed him away. The doctor's expression shifted from fear to total defeat. "I'm not doing it. Do whatever you want, but I am not doing it." Chaos erupted in the hallway. Nurses tried to pull them apart. Security came running. Madison's mother collapsed on the floor, sobbing. And amidst the noise, the operating room doors slowly slid shut. Inside the room was empty. Ryan stood at the end of the hall and texted me 2 words: "Surgery canceled." In that precise moment, I was flying at 35,000 feet. The plane had been in the air for 40 minutes. Outside the window stretched an endless, blindingly white sea of clouds. I looked at Ryan's text and let out a silent exhale. It wasn't relief. I had felt relief the moment I decided not to sign. That exhale was for the Audrey who had endured 6 years in that marriage. She didn't have to endure it anymore. Chris spent 14 hours in the FBI interrogation room. Ryan told me later that he didn't even ask for a lawyer, not because he didn't want one, but because he genuinely believed he could talk his way out of it. That was Chris's core flaw. Even with handcuffs on his wrists, he still believed he could charm anyone into letting him off the hook. I read the interrogation transcripts later. His first defense was that the $1,700,000 was a personal loan to Gregory Clark. It has nothing to do with the company. The federal agents slid the bank statements across the table. Sender Apex Tech Corporate Trust Account. Recipient. After bouncing through 3 shell LLCs, an offshore account owned by Gregory Clark. Every transfer carried a timestamp and IP address, matching Chris's personal laptop. Second defense. Those shell companies were my personal investments using my shareholder dividends. The agents pulled out the corporate bylaws and the dividend ledgers. In 6 years, Apex had never issued a single dividend. All profits remained as retained earnings. Third defense. I admit I took the money, but it was a medical emergency to save Madison's life, for her medical bills. The agents presented the tracking report. Of that $1,700,000, less than $20,000 actually went toward Madison's medical expenses. The remaining $1,680,000, after passing through Gregory's accounts, was funneled into 3 offshore hedge funds and real estate trusts. Chris's excuses crumbled one by one. In the 9th hour of the interrogation, an agent asked a simple question. Mr. Reed, do you realize that Gregory Clark was using you to launder money? Ryan said that upon hearing that question, Chris froze cold. He had probably never looked at it from that angle. In his own worldview, he was the deeply devoted hero, sacrificing everything for his first love. Madison was his unattainable ideal, a woman he owed a debt to, and Gregory Clark was his future father-in-law. He wasn't an accomplice. He was a knight in shining armor. But federal law doesn't care if you're in love. The law looks at where the money came from and where it went. You knew. You participated. After the interrogation, Chris was released on his own recognizance, pending formal indictment, with conditions: surrender his passport, a travel ban, and regular check-ins with a pretrial officer. He walked out of the FBI field office at 2 a.m. Ryan was waiting for him by the entrance, not for Chris's sake, but to hand-deliver one final piece of evidence. "Chris," Ryan called out to him. Chris turned around. According to Ryan, he looked awful. Hair disheveled, coat wrinkled, eyes bloodshot. He had aged 10 years in a single night. "Audrey asked me to give you something." Ryan pulled a manila envelope out of his briefcase. Chris took it and opened it right there under the glare of the streetlight. Inside was the paternity report. Ryan said Chris stared at that report for a very, very long time. The harsh street lamp illuminated his face, broadcasting every emotion. First, disbelief. His brow furrowed, his lips trembling as he checked the numbers over and over. Then, confusion. He flipped to the second page with the DNA profiles, staring at the sequences like a man trying to decipher an alien language. Then came comprehension. When he finally understood the phrase, 0% probability of paternity, the corners of his mouth twitched. He let out a very soft laugh. It wasn't a chuckle. It was the final muscle spasm before a total psychological collapse. Impossible. The voice seemed to be squeezed out from the very depths of his throat, hoarse and weak. "That's not possible." "It's a certified report from a state-licensed forensic lab," Ryan said in a flat voice. "They ran the test twice. The results are identical. That child shares absolutely no DNA with you." "No!" This time it was a roar. "Maddie told me it was my baby. She wouldn't lie to me." Ryan remained silent. Chris crushed the report in his fist until the paper crumpled. He stood, rooted to the spot, and then started to shake. An uncontrollable tremor originating from deep inside him, like a load-bearing pillar supporting a weight it couldn't hold. "She wouldn't lie to me." His voice grew lower, more broken. "She wouldn't." Ryan waited until his emotions settled slightly, and then delivered the final blow. "Audrey asked me to pass along one last message." Chris snapped his head up. His eyes swam in blood-red tears. "She said, 'The profound love you're so proud of showing off to everyone else is nothing but a pathetic joke.'" With that, Ryan turned and walked away. Chris slowly sank into a squat on the steps of the FBI building. He buried his head in his hands and let out a strange sound. It wasn't crying. It wasn't laughing. It was something in between, like the whimper of a mortally wounded animal. Ryan didn't look back. He got into his car and texted me, "Delivered." When I read that text in my hotel room in Copenhagen, the Nordic winter night hung outside the window. The sky was an ink-black ocean. The distant city lights looked like sunken stars. I stared at the text, my thumb hovering over the screen. I thought I would feel schadenfreude. I thought that after so much waiting, so much meticulous planning, receiving the news of his total destruction would bring a rush of vindictive euphoria. But I felt nothing, except an incredibly pure, untouched emptiness. Like a hoarder's house that has finally been deep cleaned. The photos had been taken off the walls, the knickknacks were gone. The dusty boxes I had been too sentimental to throw away had been dragged to the curb. It was empty, which meant I could finally furnish it again. I set the phone down and walked to the window. The Copenhagen winter was piercingly cold, but the air was crystal clear. I pressed my forehead against the freezing glass and slowly closed my eyes. Chris's story ended there. The rest was up to the Department of Justice. It was time to focus on myself. Rumors of Chris's downfall spread faster than I expected. Ryan told me that by the second day after the FBI raid, every partner and investor at Apex Tech knew. The tech bro circle works like that. Good news stays in the boardroom. Bad news travels 1,000 miles, especially when the bad news is a founder under federal investigation for embezzlement and forgery. That is a nuclear bomb. Within 3 days, 2 key clients terminated their contracts. Within 5 days, the sole angel investor sent a demand letter through their attorneys, triggering a forced buyout clause. The corporate accounts remained frozen. There was no money for payroll or server hosting. The engineering team started quitting en masse. First 1 or 2, then entire departments. Chris tried to save it. According to Ryan, he had meetings with 3 potential venture capital firms, but during due diligence, they all found the flagged transactions. Nobody wanted to inject capital into a company the feds were gutting. He also consulted a criminal defense attorney. After reviewing the evidence, the lawyer advised him to plead guilty and take a deal. Chris refused. The reason was simple. He still didn't believe he was guilty. In his mind, everything he did was a forced necessity. Forging the medical exam, forced. Transferring patents, forced. Embezzling corporate funds, forced. Forging a signature, forced. He saw himself as a man desperately in love, cornered by fate, not as a white-collar criminal. That self-deception was worth absolutely nothing in a federal court, but to him, it was an impenetrable fortress. Until Madison's family showed their true colors. That was the most fascinating part of the story Ryan relayed to me. The first thing Chris did after posting bail wasn't to go home or to the office. He drove straight to Seattle General Hospital to see Madison. Ryan said Chris stood outside the ICU for 2 solid hours, staring at Madison through the glass, like a kid watching fish in a tank without blinking. Then Gregory Clark showed up. Gregory's tone was drastically different than before. Before, he was bellowing outside the OR, throwing threats and screaming. Now, he was as calm as stagnant water. Chris turned his head. His voice was hoarse. "How is Maddie?" Gregory cut him off. "I came to tell you one thing. We found another donor. It's a distant relative of Maddie's. The match is solid. The money you transferred to us earlier is enough to cover the surgery." Chris was stunned. "Another donor? When did you find them?" "That doesn't matter. What matters is that from now on, you don't need to come here anymore." "What do you mean?" "I mean your current situation. Gregory's tone was icy. Your company is being audited. The FBI is all over you. If you keep associating with us, it's going to negatively affect Maddie. Ryan said he saw Chris's face when he heard those words. Like a man walking through thick fog who suddenly realizes he just stepped off the edge of a cliff. I did everything for Maddie. For Maddie, Gregory's voice finally hardened. You ruined your company for Maddie. You tanked your marriage, and now you're going to federal prison. Do you really think you're helping her? Or are you hurting her? Chris's lips trembled, but he couldn't make a sound. Leave. Gregory turned his back on him, leaving Chris staring at an indifferent silhouette. Don't come back. We'll take care of Maddie. Ryan said that after Gregory walked away, Chris stood outside the ICU doors for another 30 minutes. Then he slowly slid down the hallway wall, not into a squat. He sat flat on the floor with his legs splayed out like a marionette whose strings had been cut. He pulled out his phone and started scrolling. He reread old texts from Madison, the ones that said, I miss you so much. You are the most important person in my life. And Chris, this is our baby. He read them one by one, painfully slowly, as if searching for an answer hidden among the pixels. But there was no answer in those messages, just a meticulously woven web of lies. And he was the fly that had happily tangled itself in it. When Ryan told me this over the phone, I was sitting in the library at the University of Copenhagen. Snow was falling outside the window. The library was incredibly warm. It smelled of old paper and fresh espresso. And what happened next? I asked. After leaving the hospital, he went back to your house. He stayed there for 3 days without setting foot outside. On the 4th day, his lawyer contacted the U.S. Attorney's Office. He accepted a plea deal. I paused. What did he plead guilty to? Wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and corporate embezzlement. The prosecution asked for 48 to 72 months. 4 to 6 years. I did the mental math. By the time he got out, I would already have my PhD. And one more thing. Ryan's voice grew hesitant. In his statement to the judge, he added a specific paragraph. What paragraph? He stated, everything I did to Audrey Foster was my own choice. She did nothing wrong. If possible, I ask the court to take this into account during sentencing. I pulled the phone away from my ear and looked at the screen. The call timer ticked forward, second by second. Even at the absolute end, he didn't apologize. He didn't say, I'm sorry. He just said, I did nothing wrong. It wasn't true remorse. It was his final attempt to save face, admitting the facts, but maintaining his posture as the noble, tragic anti-hero. As always, playing the right role, but unwilling to face his true self. I understand, I said. Thank you, Ryan. You're welcome. The divorce papers are finalized. As soon as you sign them, I'll file them with the King County Superior Court. Good. Mail them to me tomorrow. And the division of assets? Everything is proceeding according to the operating agreement. Section 17 was triggered. Full voting rights and dividend control of Apex Tech have been legally transferred to you. You know the state of the company. Right now, the team is gone. Most clients have jumped ship, but those 3 core patents are still there. Because Chris's prior transfer lacked board approval, a federal judge voided it. I've already filed the motion to revert the intellectual property registration back to Apex. How did Gregory Clark react to that? They tried to claim they were bona fide purchasers, but since the transfer price was literally zero and there was clear collusion between the parties, the judge threw it out. The patents are officially back on Apex's books. I walked over to the library cafe, ordered a black coffee, and sat back down. What is the current valuation of those 3 patents? Market conditions have changed. AI and medical imaging are booming right now. I contacted 2 IP valuation firms. The range is 4 million to 5.5 million, higher than before. I remembered debugging the underlying architecture of those patents for Chris, line by line. During that exhausting time recovering from my miscarriage, lying in bed with my abdomen still aching, the laptop resting on the duvet, the blue light washing over my pale face, while Chris sat next to me playing PlayStation. Audrey, are you listening? The voice brought me back to reality. Yes, go on. One more thing about the public reaction. You've probably already seen it, though I know you don't follow Seattle news much anymore. The news spread fast through the tech world. As soon as the FBI raided, the VC funds basically blacklisted him. His old partners and investors, guys who used to call him brother, now just say, I don't know the man. And his social media? He stopped posting before the plea deal, but others didn't. People are sharing screenshots of the DOJ press release. The top comment on his old Facebook post is, "Remember this guy crying for pity and calling his wife cold? Now we know who the real psychopath was." I smiled faintly. And your mother-in-law. Ex-mother-in-law. Ryan corrected himself with a touch of malicious glee. Chris's mother posted in their HOA group chat saying you drove her son to this, saying, if she had just agreed to save a life, none of this would have happened. And they absolutely tore her apart. Someone leaked your real lab results. The ALT at 91 that Chris forged down to 42. People commented, her own liver was compromised, and you wanted her to let doctors cut her open to save your son's mistress. That's not coldness. That's attempted murder. She didn't reply. She just left the chat. I took a sip of the hot coffee. The Scandinavian winter wind rattled the library windows. Ryan, I have no intention of running the company. Find a buyer and sell all 3 patents as a package deal. Starting price, $4 million. Liquidate the rest of the fixed assets and office equipment. Sell it all. Everything. Everything, and what's your next move? I looked out at the snow. I'll think about the future when I get there. I have to wipe the past clean entirely. Ryan stayed quiet for a few seconds. You've changed. In what way? Before, you weren't this decisive. You hesitated, weighed options, always took other people's feelings into account. It's not about being decisive, I replied. It's just that before I couldn't distinguish between my own life and the demands of others. Now I can. I'm a work in progress. Hanging up, I sat alone at the library table, watching the sky turn a dull grayish blue. In winter, daylight in Copenhagen is incredibly brief. By 3:30 p.m., it's already getting dark. But I was slowly getting used to that rhythm. The long winter nights are perfect for quiet reflection. I opened my laptop. On the screen was the draft of my doctoral dissertation. Topic: Legal Safeguards of Informed Consent for Living Organ Donors, a comparative study of U.S. and Nordic legal frameworks. I had chosen that topic during my first week in Denmark. My advisor asked me why I picked that specific angle. I told him, because I have personal experience. He looked at me and didn't pry. That's the beauty of Nordic culture. They respect boundaries and don't try to rip open your scars under the guise of concern. I wrote for 2 hours, adding over 1,400 words. I saved the file and shut down the computer. Then I went back to my apartment and did something I hadn't done in 6 years. I just lay on the couch and stared at the ceiling for half an hour, thinking about absolutely nothing. I didn't have to review any NDAs. I didn't have to comfort anyone. I didn't have to answer calls. I didn't have to text, "Honey, have you eaten?" I just lay there in silence, enjoying that luxury without a single ounce of guilt. The patent sale went better than expected. Ryan found 3 tech conglomerates interested, and a bidding war closed the deal at $4,800,000. After capital gains taxes, legal fees, and paying off the company's remaining debts, I walked away with $3,200,000 clean. I split the money into 3 parts. The first went to reimburse my initial capital from the premarital condo plus interest. That was a debt I owed myself. The second went into a blind trust of index funds. That would be my living stipend and tuition for the next 5 years. The final part I donated anonymously to a US-based nonprofit that provides free legal defense for living organ donors. When Ryan found out, he called me a saint. I told him it wasn't sainthood, it was an investment. An investment in a legal system to ensure no one else ended up cornered like I was. With that settled, I did one more thing. I sold the house. The house Chris and I bought before the wedding in an upscale Seattle suburb. 4 bedrooms, vaulted ceilings, a small backyard. When we renovated it, I personally picked out every tile, every light fixture. Even the height of the kitchen counters was custom measured exactly to my height. I thought it was our home. It turned out to be just my individual investment and a convenient shelter for someone else. I gave Ryan full power of attorney to handle the sale. I didn't fly back to take one last look. "What do you want to do with the stuff inside?" Ryan asked. "Your clothes, books, personal items?" "Ship them to Denmark. Donate the clothes to Goodwill, and the rest," I thought for a second. "Throw the rest away. Everything. Even the wedding albums." "Audrey," I cut him off. "I don't want a single object from that house that is remotely related to Chris. Consider it a deep clean or a biohazard decontamination. Look at it however you want, but please get rid of it all. Understood?" The house ended up selling 5% below market value simply because I didn't want to wait. The buyers were a young couple, newlyweds. Ryan said they were euphoric during the walkthrough. The wife went out to the backyard and said, "I'm going to plant roses right here." When Ryan told me this, I was sitting in a Copenhagen cafe working on my thesis. "She'll take wonderful care of that garden," I said. "Are you sad? You lived in that house for 5 years." "Why would I be sad?" I set down my espresso, thought about it, and replied, "Ryan, do you know what I did most in that house? I waited. I waited for Chris to come home for dinner. I waited for him to finish his board meetings. I waited for him to get back from networking events. I waited for him to reply to my texts. That house wasn't a home to me. It was a waiting room. I sat in it for 5 years, and instead of my train arriving, I got a notice that the flight was permanently canceled." Ryan stayed silent. "So no, I'm not sad," I said. "Selling a waiting room isn't something to cry over." The weekend after selling the house, I did something I had wanted to do for a long time, but always put off. I bought a new journal. Not a digital notes app, but a real, thick, dark blue hardcover notebook. I spent a long time picking it out at a stationery shop in downtown Copenhagen. Returning to my apartment, I made a cup of hot chocolate, sat by the window, and opened the first page. Outside, it was a dark Nordic winter night. The sky was heavy ink black, with just a few stars piercing through the cloud cover. I uncapped my pen and wrote the first line on the blank paper. Why did I let him treat me like that? The tip of the pen hovered after the question mark. Then I kept writing. Because I thought that was love. I thought loving someone meant giving unconditionally, giving them the best and keeping the hardest parts for yourself. I thought that was called being a good wife, being generous, being understanding. But now I know that wasn't love. It was self-exploitation, sacrificing my career that was called supporting him, risking my health that was called saving a life.